I took a quick break and looked at Parvini's publications. And he has a book on liberalism. So I wanted to have a look before continuing with this, because I don't want to be ungenerous to him. So he's got a book, The Defenders of Liberty. And it presents a history of economic liberalism from Renaissance to the present. So he does go through all these people, Hobbes, Locke, Ludwig von Mises, Hayek, Friedman, Rothbard, and Thomas Sowell. The book contends that liberalism used to be grounded in realism, and it has been derailed whenever economists have deviated from an explicitly realist understanding of human nature. Right, so an explicitly realist, so human nature, so an explicitly realist understanding of human nature, individualism, and property rights. It argues that the cause of liberalism was compromised by errors in economic reasoning, by such major figures as Ricardo, Mill, Marshall, I'm trying to pronounce that name, Pigot, and Keynes. In diagnosing what has gone wrong for liberalism, the book argues against substituting mathematical abstraction for causal realism. So I'm guessing you want causal realism rather than mathematical abstraction. So the Austrian School is against mathematical abstractions. I agree with that. But what is causal realism? Let's think about it. It opposes interventionist central banking. It seeks to recover economic liberalism from social and political liberalism. Okay, that's good. Which are somewhat unrelated school of thought. It resists a view of human nature rooted in selfishness or atomized individualism. And finally, alerts defenders of freedom to the ruthless but effective language games played by their opponents. And I haven't read the book. I might read it. Let's have a look at the contents. You see, the problem that I see is that you have people who are good at history research, and you have this very broad, high level overview of a discipline. But it's not done by an economist. And it's done, by someone who basically does a very general overview of a very broad subject. There's too much. There's too much going on here to have some kind of an anchor. You have kind of this very broad brush look at things, which is great. You can be a very broad-minded person, but does it give us a framework for thinking about this stuff that Lenin? I'm sure that communists consider themselves to be. I mean, when you read, for example, Marcuse, that's how I pronounce it. Some people pronounce it Marcuse, I guess. I pronounce it Marcuse. This is the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School philosopher. I read some of his stuff. I was interested in that. I was I guess I was on the left for a while, like everybody. He talks about liberation all the time. That's all he talks about, freedom. I don't think that Marcuse's understanding of liberation and freedom is the same as the Austrian School. So you have the same word maybe, but the framework is so different. They basically have completely different meaning, right? The Austrian School is not interested in, for example, sexual liberation, right? And I don't think that being an Austrian means, for example, that you necessarily believe that sex can be commodified like anything else. In other words, and in fact, when you look at, say, the Mises Institute, those people seem to be very social conservative. So they don't believe in this kind of idea of libertarianism where you should just be able to buy and sell anything. So this is a problem that in order to kind of gain a deeper understanding, like even just something like Austrian economics, that is a huge field, and I've listened to lectures on by all the different lecturers, and they all kind of cover different aspects: the philosophical aspect, the political, the banking. It's just so much just to understand Austrian economics, in particular the Mises Rothbard school. So then when you write about Machiavelli and Keynes, and then you throw all these people in the bucket, to me, that is too broad. I don't think it's not a good book. I think it's a good book. But the thing is that when you have that kind of a broad brush view, then you end up with this, because it doesn't anchor you in any way. And you end up reading Lenin. And from an Austrian point of view, the first thing about Lenin is he's a communist. He's not, actually, there was an interesting point made by one of the Austrian school people, I think it was Tom Woods, and he goes, Austrians are not, no, it wasn't Tom Woods, it was the one of the European guys. He goes, Austrians are not against communists, as long as as long as the communism is voluntary. If you want to go and study your communist kibbutz, libertarians and Austrians are totally fine with that. If you're doing it voluntarily, no problem. You can be a communist. The problem is that Lenin was not a voluntary communist. He and his compadres enslaved millions of Russians forcibly. And that is basically the first thing to know about that. And then that needs to color everything else that you read that he wrote, and you ask yourself, well, is it voluntary or not? So, okay, so let's continue with this.
50 banks alone. BlackRock, which is not a bank but an asset manager, alone manages over $11 trillion in assets.
Yeah, so these are those big numbers. They're completely uninteresting. Okay, so the third feature is export capital.
Let's see that capitalism seeks constantly capital export. David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage is destroyed by the reality that capitalism seeks constantly to expand into foreign markets with direct investments. In the earlier stage of capitalism, which is so beloved of libertarians like Elon Musk or Milton Friedman, etc., it was...
You see, It's this gesturing and hand waving that is the problem here. So Elon Musk is libertarian. Milton Friedman is a libertarian. Yeah, libertarianism is a label, and within that label, like let's say if I say I like jazz. Oh, you like jazz too? Well, we both like the same thing. No, right? So you have music, then you have those genres, jazz, classical. Within all genres, you have subgenres, and within those subgenres, you have subgenres, right? And so the question is, what is the level of analysis in a particular context that is useful? And academic agent is saying the level of analysis of Elon Musk and Milton Friedman is a useful level of analysis in the context of discussing David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. No, it's not. You see, this is the problem, because the earliest stage of capitalism, which is so beloved, that so the idea that capitalism has stages, I've never heard that that concept in discussed by the Mises Institute people or Hans Hermann Hoppe or any of those people. Never heard that there are stages of capitalism. This whole idea of stages sounds very Marxist to me, because you have this Marxist historical analysis, which seems to be, there's this stage and there's that stage. What is the basis for this analysis? I'm not really sure. So he's just dropping in this idea of stages of capitalism without explaining it. And then he's saying that libertarians like Elon Musk and Milton Friedman love this early stage of capitalism. Now, I think one way that Austrians have kind of discussed something like that is when they discuss the issue of the state. So that early on, taxes are low, and then the economy develops. And then as the economy becomes more developed and more, the state tries to progressively gain more control over it so that it can expropriate through taxation and regulation. Right? So it's not that capitalism has stages, it's that an economy can move from being a free market economy, which will create development and growth, right? Increase the productive capacity, the capital, the productivity is increasing. You have companies with machinery, right? And then the state can use once that economy grows to a certain extent, it's prone to being controlled by the state, right? So when you look at socialist countries, when you look at the capital, basically all they're doing is they're running on the capital, meaning the buildings, the roads, and the businesses that were developed when the country was a free market economy. And all they're doing is they're not creating any new capital, they're just running down the capital that was built up during the earlier phase. So yeah, Austrians do accept that kind of analysis where the state, the social state, can take hold of a developed economy and then just expropriate it, but it cannot, because it's the position is that the state, the socialist economy cannot build up new capital. That's the position. I could find the exact quote, but that's what he said.
Typically goods that they sought to export. But in the later stage, when monopoly rather than competition reigns, capitalism seeks to export capital.
So in the latter stage, when monopoly rather than competition reigns. Okay, so on an Austrian analysis, what happens is the economy develops, then the state takes control of the economy, starts regulating, and then it creates monopolies, not in the sense that it's a state monopoly, but it basically gives preferential treatment, for example, through regulations. So regulations create barriers to new entrants. So basically they reduce competition. And so the big businesses go to, let's say they have competitors, and they just pay off the politicians, and then the politicians create regulations and taxes that favor one company over others. I'm sorry. And they create monopolies in that way. Okay, so this is not some inevitable stage, but it's something that does happen, and that's basically the problem, not with capitalism. It's a problem with the state, which I would call corporate capitalism, right? The problem with the word capitalism is that it's basically like racism. It's a kind of a Marxist term, which is essentially just a derogatory term, which includes both legitimate free market operations and kind of a state, public-private, statist, monopolies, where you have these private, putatively private enterprises, but really they are the lack of competition is because of political involvement by the state, right? Paying off politicians, and then they create regulations to get rid of the competition. So this is you see, this is the problem with the framework, the background theory. You have the same thing, but the two kind of frames will give you a completely different thing. So like Scott Adams talks about how people are watching two different movies, right? The left is watching a different movie from the right. They're looking at the same thing, but they're seeing a completely different thing.
In the layman, this is building factories in Mexico or in China or insert third world country here. This interest in emerging markets was ultimately behind that class of capitalists who supported Brexit here in Britain. For example, Jacob.
Let me go back to just...
Layman, this is building factories. Capitalism seeks to export capital. In the layman, this is building factories in Mexico.
Capitalism seeks to so the monopoly rather than competition reigns. So that means state monopoly, right? So it's, or what I just described. Then capitalism seeks to export capital. You mean the machines or the... Okay, so let's say they take the money and then they build factories. Okay, all right.
Mexico so in China.
In normal language, rather than this Marxist kind of derogatory tone, in normal language, it means the companies in the rich country want to build factories in countries where labor, and I guess inputs in the production process is cheaper. They're not exporting anything. This language, this kind of Marxist language is obfuscating. It's not really clarifying. It's not educating. You're not exporting capital. You're taking capital built up in a rich country, and you're building productive, means you're taking the money and expertise and stuff, and you're going to a poorer country and you're building factories there, manufacturing. Well, you have to decide, is manufacturing good or bad? if more manufacturing is good, then this is a benefit for the poorer country. But when you say export capital, it's like you're exporting something evil to Vietnam, and Vietnam is now being exploited. Well, sorry, if we have to decide, is manufacturing good or bad? If manufacturing is good, then for Vietnam, they had a bunch of people sitting on their bums and doing nothing and eating rice. And now they have a factory, and now these people can work in a factory. They can buy a house or a car or a motorbike or, whatever. They have stuff, send their kids to a nice school. So this must be bad for the rich country. I'm not really sure, because the ominous tone doesn't make fine distinctions. It's just like, it's all evil, it's capitalism.
Third world country here.
So in a layman, this is building factories in, okay, so here's, okay, or China, or insert third world country here. This interest in emerging markets was ultimately behind the class of capitalists who supported Brexit here in Britain. I mean, it's just so much hand waving.
This interest in emerging here in Britain, for example, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
This is my problem. This is why I haven't published anything, because I was just trained in philosophy, and all of my training was basically aimed at conceptual clarity. What do you mean? And don't do hand waving, like clear logical arguments. That's my whole training. I'm paralyzed by this, because apparently academics in the UK, hand waving and lack of clarity is all great. Just keep plowing through, and then my impression was that Americans were more, well, actually, I'm not sure. I had this impression this is more of an American thing. I'm not sure what to think about this, but it's making me think that I need to write more and publish more, because I think I can write clearly and concisely and succinctly and make succinct points.
Made his money in emerging markets. Fourth characteristic of imperialism, spatial stratification because of corporate dominance. The biggest companies by market capitalization at the time.
Okay, what's happening? So is this, I mean, I can't tell whether this is Lenin, because he said that it's Lenin's features. Spatial stratification because of market corporate dominance. So it's figures, it's aggregates. And the point is, what's the point? It's evil. Capitalism. Capitalism bad. Communism good. I mean, okay, monopolies. All this gives rise to monopolies, which are ultimately parasitic. Means evil, they're evil, and lead to stagnation and decay. They lead to stagnation and decay, higher prices and low quality. So Google leads to stagnation, decay, higher prices and lower quality, and Facebook, these companies lead to, okay, I will take your word for it.
Quality of imperialism can.
So he's saying that, I'm guessing this is Lenin, because he's talking about 1907. So So the immigration changes from the developed countries to the New World and switches in the other direction. So yeah, so he's looking at Hobson. As Hobson observes, emigration from Great Britain has been declining since 1884. In that year, the number of immigrants was turning. So he's looking at some numbers. Imperialism has a tendency to create privileged sections also among the workers and to detach them from the broad masses of the proletariat. Okay, and because it's Lenin is saying this is it's all bad. Even while we are being realists, right? So we're being realists that there are social classes, but this stuff which creates social classes in the developed countries because bringing in foreign workers, that's bad. Okay.
Connected with the fact observed
It's a long
there were
passage.
one
Let's move on.
it as capitalism's way of inevitably breaking down the nation states, quite divided over the issue. And from Lenin have led Marxists and communists historically to be quite divided over the issue of immigration. There is quite a nuanced essay on this by the famed French Marxist philosopher Etienne Balibar, who was a mate of Louis Althusser's, called Lenin, Communists and Immigration, which is worth seeking out if you're interested. On the one hand, they support mass immigration in a kind of Machiavellian way, because they view it as capitalism's way of inevitably breaking down the nation states, which is a necessary stage in history according to Marxist teleology. Also, they hope foreign workers and native workers might one day put aside their differences to see the true enemy, their mutual enemy, the enemy of all mankind. These can shut their eyes to the progressive significance.
I don't know. It all seems very
Article by the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party of Great Britain. They see mass immigration as a weapon against the working class, given that it drives down wages and wrecks union bargaining power. Now, I got quite a kick out of reading various splinter groups of communists bickering over this issue. For example, this letter to the LRP, that is immigration laws. Yes or no? So Kyle's concept of perpetual nomadism, or writ large and international, would cut off further inflows. Here, bizarrely, we find a dyed-in-the-wool communist being more realistic about mass immigration than effect national identity.
okay. So let's have a look at what they're saying here. If, for example, there were unlimited immigration into Northern Europe, the population influx from the Mediterranean basin would tend to dissolve the national identity of small countries like Holland and Belgium. There's no suggestion in this passage or also in the article that such a hypothetical development would necessarily be a bad thing. It all states that a sufficiently large scale change in the ethnic composition of the population of a particular territory must inevitably change its natural character. This is simply a fact. The LRP asserts that the next sentence in the article shows that the SL regards massive immigration as a real danger. In reality, of course, long before immigration would actually affect national identity, a chauvinist reaction penetrating even into traditionally pro-socialist working class would cut off further inflows. However much we might wish that this was not true. Okay, so the socialists and the communists and the Marxists are discussing whether the national character would be a good or a bad thing. But they're not interested in voluntarism. So Poland that I grew up under as a child had Polish culture. It had, and it still has, ethnic and racial homogeneity. The problem was everyone was poor and there was not enough food. Now, I'm not saying that you need to have mass inflows of foreign people to have food. What I am saying is that communists do not provide a framework for a nation to prosper, which requires private property and voluntarism, without which you can have national character, but you're going to be starving, you're going to be poor. You won't have a place to live. Everything will be cheap and crap. So why do I care whether Marxists think that having a national character is a good thing or not? Like, what are they going to, sort of reason it out and engage in some kind of engineering plan? I mean, they did that and they destroyed all of Eastern Europe and Russia. They've destroyed those places. They all had all that, history and tradition and religion, but they were all poor and wanted to leave and go to another country like the US or Australia or whatever, because there was not enough stuff. It was cold and people were hungry. This is what socialism does. So now we're going to read them bickering over whether immigration is good for socialism or not. I don't care, because I don't want socialism. Socialism is bad. That's the first thing. And they pretend that they are pro-working class. Well, on the right, we assume that the working class wants capitalism. They want a free market. And the Austrian School of Economics accepts that you can have open borders, you can have welfare, but you can't have both. And without the welfare, these people would not be coming. That is the first thing. Without the welfare and without all the NGOs and all the whole migration industry, there will be far fewer of these people coming. The problem is that there is a global immigration industry and welfare fueling all of this. Differently in different countries, the situation is different in different countries, but none of it is the result of a free market, okay? So the whole discussion is basically irrelevant because it's not a free market. What you have is a welfare state, and now this welfare state is allowing these people to come and live and get the welfare. And this welfare is not just, I don't mean just like, unemployment benefits, but I mean all kinds of things that they're getting for free, right? That if you, for example, if you look at foreign labor in, say, the Middle East, in Dubai, right? These people have to work, and if they don't work, they have to leave. There's no problem with importing a foreign labor force. The problem is that you have this visa system, green card system, education, all this other stuff that if you don't mention it, it's neither here nor there. I don't even want to bother reading this because it just seems irrelevant.
See, a chauvinist reaction penetrating even into a traditionally pro-socialist working class would cut off further inflows. Here, bizarrely, we find a dyed-in-the-wool communist being more realistic about mass immigration than Elon Musk or
No, they're not. If they're communists, they're not realistic about anything. They're completely, they are like on drugs. Their whole worldview is so perverted and And all it is they talk about the working class. What about the working class in Soviet Russia? I mean, they're not realistic about anything. They might say something that is realistic sounding. What is the point of this?
Vivek Ramaswamy. My point here is not, of course, to endorse communism or Lenin, but rather to point out that mass immigration has been part of their theory of capitalist imperialism per se for over 100 years at this point.
So, okay, I'm glad that you're not endorsing it. I'm just pointing out that it's been part of their theory. Okay, and let's see the punchline.
They see it as a feature and not as a bug of capitalism.
Okay, so they see it as a feature and not a bug of capitalism. No, as I explained, it's not a feature. It's not a feature of the free market. It's a feature of statist corporatism. So statist kind of capitalism. This is the problem, is you're using the word capitalism in a way that conceals rather than revealing. You have to distinguish between the free market with voluntary exchanges and a big state that is using all kinds of levers, including taxation, including education systems that are state-funded, including all kinds of regulations, including NGOs that are funded by billionaires who are engaging in illegal human trafficking activities. It's a whole complicated system. And if you want to call that capitalism, you can do that. The problem is that it's meaningless. You're just using capitalism as the current system that, like in the US or in the West. And that's capitalism. That's the meaning of the term is this whole system. But somehow it's supposed to be what the libertarians want, because Elon Musk and Milton Friedman love something or other. I mean, it's all hand waving. If what you mean is the free market and voluntarism, then it's not a feature. Because the current system is the bug, because it's not free. It's not a free market.
As Carlyle's concept of perpetual nomadism writ large and international. It seems to me that Lenin's theory has had predictive explanatory power on this score. Virtually every aspect of what he said would happen vis-a-vis the concentration of capital, the financialization of developed economies, the exporting of capital, and the mass importation of, as he called them, backward peoples into rich imperialist nations has indeed come to pass. In fairness, others too called this, not least Brooks Adams, who discussed the West needing to suck on fresh blood to renew itself in 1895 in his seminal book, The Law of Civilization and Decay, a book I discuss in The Prophets of Doom, Buy It Now, etc., and Oswald Spengler. But rather that it seems that no matter what, global capitalists are going to keep following this course since...
And I think the Austrian School position is that you can't really do economic history without a framework. So Austrians write history from an Austrian perspective, a praxeological perspective. And what they're saying is you can't really understand, for example, like the Great Depression, or you will have a warped understanding without the praxeological theory. So communists will say that it was capitalism, evil capitalism, that has caused the Great Depression. Whereas Austrians will say that it was basically the expansion of the money supply by the central bank. It's central banking that has caused as a Great Depression. In other words, without the theory, you don't understand anything. It doesn't, and then you end up with this kind of communist analysis, and then you end up with communism, because capitalism bad, capitalism evil, and then you end up with the Soviet Union, you end up with Cuba and all these and all these defunct economies because capitalism evil. This really needs to be stopped. And we really need proper economic education. And not Elon Musk is a libertarian and he's a capitalist, and Lenin said, this hand waving and these generalizations, these aggregates, these numbers, it's all nonsense, and it's creating confusion, and it's not educational. We need proper economic education. Thomas Sowell said that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And that's accurate. Then, you have to decide, okay, how much economic activity are you willing to curtail, and what will be the costs of that? But this whole idea that this is evil, capitalism is evil because it's exported capital, and this is nonsense. This is very unhelpful and a real problem on the right. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because I'm on a roll, and I don't want to have to do it tomorrow. So now I'm gonna use this as a preamble to discuss China. Where are we? So yeah, his final punchline. It's according to Lenin, it's a feature, not a bug. No, disagree.